So good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Watson. I am the director of the Catherine G. Murphy Gallery at St. Catherine University. I'm really pleased to welcome you to tonight's virtual artist talk with Christine Nguyen and Dao Strom, which is being facilitated and moderated by Ánh-Hoa Nguyen. They will be discussing the work on view in our current gallery exhibition titled Reverberating Bodies. I would like to begin today's event by recognizing that St. Catherine University is located on the ancestral homelands of the Dakota people, specifically the Vahapukuti and the Oceti-Sakowin. Other sovereign American Indian nations, including the Anishinaabe-Wake, also have a long history, past, present, and future with these sacred lands. Since we are all joining tonight's event from a variety of locations, I thought we could approach the rest of this land acknowledgement just a little differently. In lieu of an expanded statement, I offer 3 self-reflection prompts shared with me by Jamie Black. Jamie is a multidisciplinary artist of mixed Anishinaabe and European descent, and as many of you likely recall, she is the creator of the Red Dress Project, which was on view at St. Kate's last fall. I'm going to read the prompts and pause between each of them, so we have a few minutes to just let them sink in, think about them, feel free to jot them down, and then we'll move on to the rest of our program. Prompt number 1, what is the history of the land you inhabit, and how do you situate yourself in that history? Prompt number 2, how do you care for the land that you inhabit? And prompt number 3, what stories are held in the land you inhabit? Who do these stories belong to, and what personal experiences do you bring to these stories? Thank you. So before I turn things over to Ánh-Hoa, I want to provide you just with some information about the format of tonight's event. Ánh-Hoa, Christine, and Dao will be in dialogue for about 35 to 40 minutes. Then we'll have about 20 minutes for audience questions. At that time, you will be invited to type your questions into the chat or turn on your microphone and ask in person. In the meantime, I kindly ask that you keep your microphones muted so we can eliminate any additional background noise. This event is being recorded and will be posted to the gallery's website in about 2 weeks. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Ánh-Hoa Nguyen, the curator of Reverberating Bodies. Because I want to save as much time as possible for tonight's discussion, I'm just going to share a few of the highlights from her very impressive biography. She is a refugee, poet, community artist, and educator. She holds an MFA in creative writing from Mills College in Oakland, California, and she is currently a member of She Who Has No Masters, a collective of women and gender nonconforming writers of the Vietnamese diaspora. She is the publisher and editor of the forthcoming book, Frame to Focus, Contemporary Vietnamese American Women Artists. From a personal perspective, and as her colleague here at St. Kate's, I can tell you that Ánh-Hua's commitment to social justice and its expression through the liberal arts guides her creativity and scholarship. She is a gifted storyteller, a respected instructor, and an energetic and compassionate collaborator. In a moment, I'm going to put a link into the chat where you can read the many accomplishments of Ánh-Hoa, as well as both of our artists. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and I'm going to pass it off to you, Ánh-Hoa.
Thank you, Nicole. That was such a lovely introduction. I don't feel like I deserve all the accolades.
Every word, you deserve every word.
The 2 wonderful artists here tonight. So it's my honor to host tonight's conversation with Dao Strom and Christine Nguyen, 2 of my favorite artists. Like Nicole said, I'm not going to use the time tonight to read their extremely impressive bios, so you can see them on the St. Kate's Gallery website. So tonight's conversation will focus on the journey of each artist and their influences and experiences that have been formidable for both Christine and Dao in their evolution as Vietnamese American women artists. So I'm so happy to be here and let's get into this conversation and beam into the cosmic and ethereal worlds of Dao and Christine. And I'm just going to jump right into it with our first question, which is actually an invitation to share your story of how you came to be the artist you are today. So I don't know which one you want to go first, but.
Flip a coin.
Well, I guess I'll start. Well, I work in multiple disciplines, I guess is what you call it, interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary artist. But I really began as a writer. I've written all my life, kind of. Just as a child, I was good at writing and making up stories, and it was sort of my refuge from the world. And I also, my mother was a writer, so that is part of the encouragement, or just, like I was encouraged to use my imagination. And I actually went to undergraduate as a film major. So I started out in studying film, and I made a student film. We played in some festivals like early on. So maybe that was some of the first making of art, though that was a very young ambition. I was very young at that time, and I moved out to New York City with friends that I'd gone to college with, and I kind of couldn't really, there was a lot of overwhelm, and so I ended up applying to graduate school. I went to graduate school for creative writing and studied fiction. I published my first story when I was 22. It won a contest. So that was sort of my start. And around that same time, I started playing music just as a side pleasure, or just something that I wanted to do or learn how to do. And it took a number of years for those things to kind of come together into this hybrid form. And I would just start, one of the things that really made that hybrid thing happen was the failure of like my fiction career, I guess, to really take off. I had published 2 books of fiction. The second book, I initially had sold a 2-book contract. And when I turned in the second book, the publisher rejected it. And I had to pay back part of the advance, and, eventually like found another publisher, which was like a smaller house. So it didn't do well in numbers at all. And then after that point, it was like hard for me to kind of continue writing. Like I really was making attempts at writing another book. And then something happened, and I just sort of went off. Like I was just too unconventional, and I went off into left field and started merging image and text. And at the same time, I was writing songs that had, same territory. So I was slowly forming this hybrid path, which maybe my failure to have a traditional literary fiction career put me on that like out in left field path. So, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges. There isn't a big context for it. So I've sort of found myself trying to figure out, or figure out what arena I belong in. I'll just.
Well, it's interesting because we just recently hosted Gwen Westerman, and one of the things she mentioned in one of her interviews was that she felt like a failed painter, and so that's why she started writing poetry and then creating visual narratives with quilts and textiles. And so I kind of feel similarly, where I was not the best. I mean, I was an okay art student in like middle school, but I knew that I could never paint what I really wanted to imagine, or the landscapes that I imagined, or the worlds that I imagined. So I think that's where I turned to poetry, which I think allows for more abstractness, like you were saying, than fiction does on some level. Thank you. Christine, what would you say are some of your formidable experiences or your journey?
I guess I've always been like a maker as a kid, and always drew and painted. And my dad let me, actually, I think I just took my dad's analog camera and was taking a lot of photos as a young kid. And then, so for undergrad, my undergrad study is in photography. And I remember my last semester, I think, at that time I was thinking, oh, I'm a photo major. I shouldn't be drawing or painting. But I think my last semester at Cal State Long Beach, I was like, well, I kind of want to combine mediums. I was already doing a lot of alternative processes and experimental photography. And so I began drawing on layered mylar and using those as negatives.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess over the years, I mean, that's how my process has developed. But I mean, I would say, like, looking at, things I did in the late 90s, I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't really draw that much. You can tell, like people were like, oh, is that like outsider art? And I'm like, no, I just wasn't drawing a lot. So I would say, so then in grad school is when I further developed my like photo-based process, which I consider as more like painting, and did sculptural stuff. I guess I've always been into like mixing medias, like doing, drawing, painting, photography, and sculptural work. I didn't really have that much support from my family. Speaking of support, like I think my parents originally wanted to go to a art school. And my parents didn't want me to. They wanted me to go to like a state school because I would change my major, but I never changed my major when I was in college. And then for grad school, my excuse for going to grad school was like, oh, I can teach, if I have, go to school for my MFA. Like, so in their eyes, it was like, okay, at least you're doing something practical.
Yeah.
Versus for me, I don't know if teaching has always been something I've wanted to do, maybe later on, but it was something like, oh, that's like my backup, I would say.
So it's not unusual for, I guess, young Vietnamese Americans to not have support from their family because they want us to, be lawyers and doctors. And but would you say, would you say that there were people along the way that kind of help you kind of not give up hope, or like mentored you?
I don't know. I think I'm just like have a really stubborn personality. Like if I'm focused on doing something, like I know what I want. And so I'm just gonna go for it and do it. And then I don't know. I think maybe it was just exciting for me to like be in the art department and see what other people were making and doing. And I was thinking like, I just knew that was like my calling. Like I always want, I mean, I didn't know exactly what I was going to be doing, if this photo-based process was going to be something I do forever, but I just knew, I mean, I've been such a maker since I was like a kid, and a collector of natural, stuff in the natural world. A high school friend of mine actually showed me a picture of something I gave her in high school. And it was, I guess we had found these glasses on the street. And then I had like, I guess filled it with like dandelions and a rock and put a cardboard top on it. And then it's pretty much like a bell jar kind of makeshift terrarium. And it was funny because I hadn't thought about it in so long. And I feel like it's very much something I still do today. Like things are in jars or in bell jars, like the same kind of stuff. So I realized like, oh, you really don't change. I mean, you grow and develop, but like the core you is the same, I would say. But yeah, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I just remember like having a hard time, like trying to get have my parents understand what I was doing. They just didn't understand what I was doing. So, me being the oldest, it was like, oh yeah, our oldest daughter, she's like the weird one. I was always like the weird, crazy one. And then I had a aunt that kind of disowned me. I think it was my senior in high school. She asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, oh, I want to study art. And she was just like, I can't talk to you anymore. And I don't know, it was really weird.
Yeah. Dao, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say that the idea of not changing, or, like sort of like the pieces are there. Like I feel like looking back now, I can see that I studied like these different, like the filmmaking and the writing, and then like music, like that it did kind of come together. And each step of the way, I didn't know what I was doing or where it was going, or why I was doing those things. But in terms of family, I similarly, I think I did what I felt like doing. I think I have to say that I have to credit my mother on like, the fact that she did sort of not pressure us to conform to like certain family obligations, which in Vietnamese culture can be very strong pressures as far as like, taking care of the elders or like, paying attention to what other people think. And so maybe that the decision to do something weird, and I was always the weird one also, was easier to make. And my parents like accepted what I was doing, but I think they felt more comfortable when they saw that like there was teaching that would be involved or something like that was like a more concrete thing for them to latch onto. And it still continues to be honestly like difficult, as in like I had a conversation with my mom not long ago, and I was describing to her some project that we were doing for she has her master's, and she was like, let me ask you something, what do you do for a living? Like, so it's like it's still there in some ways, as in it's hard to explain like how these pieces come together.
The words that are burned into my mind are like real job. Like, when are you going to get a real job? And so I don't know exactly what that means, if that's like, if there's a monetary value to that real job, but yeah. So I think it's really fascinating that like both down at, we've been to Vietnam, and like there's such a great, rich culture of art and music in Vietnam, especially like your mom was a writer and poetry is really revered. And so I think it's really fascinating that given kind of like the generational war kind of immigrant refugee thing where art and music and poetry lose their value in some level, right? Like I sometimes wonder if I had stayed in Vietnam, would I still be a poet? Would it been easier, or if post-war we would still be having the same pressures, right, of survival or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, do you ever think about that?
I almost sometimes think I might not have been an artist. Like so much of the questions that I've wrestled with, I guess, as an artist, as a Vietnamese American artist, have a lot to do with exodus and displacement. And so a lot of that type of art making, like they're like, I don't feel it as much anymore, but there have been times in the past where I've sort of mourned like, what could have been, or like the idea of just being a more innocent soul or something in the world, or what would it feel like to actually have roots, or to, live where you came from, and have that just be a part of your being. And now I'm like fine with it. It's, and like I sort of have embraced this hybridity and this diaspora and all of that. But it is kind of, I might have been like sewing clothes, or or maybe I would still be singing, but maybe it would be without all this context.
Maybe you'd be doing Paris by Night.
I don't know. Maybe it would have been more just simple and joyful, but they're obviously not, because there was war there. So, if there was no war.
So, Christine, your work is so, it's just, the word that I kind of think of is so pure. Like there's just such an intense creative spirit and like vision and mastery. And like, for me, I feel like if I were your parent, I would be like, there's no way I'm getting in the way of this, talent or whatever.
Yeah. Now they're more, I had a solo exhibition at the Hammer Museum, or in their project space in Los Angeles. And I took my parents there, and I, looked at my dad. Well, first they were like, people pay to go see art. Like they just still didn't understand that. And then I was showing my parents the installation. My mom, I think, likes it. She's supportive. But my dad, I looked at him, I told him, you realize like all this is because of you. Like a lot of my inspiration comes from nature, and him being a commercial fisherman when I was younger, like I would see all the things he would pull up from the ocean, and then I'd spend a lot of time on his boat. And he's just like, no. And then, of course, my mom is trying to touch the artwork and, and all that. But I think now they're more I don't know, because I don't think I've ever asked them for help financially, that they're like, okay, at least you seem happy and you can take care of yourself. So that's good. I mean, they're
Yeah.
thinking it more of like that term, but I don't know if they actually, like, I'm not sure what my dad thinks about my artwork or if he even really looks at it a certain way. And my mom is just like, oh, it's pretty, it's beautiful. And then that's it. Like, that's all it goes, doesn't go beyond that.
Well, I'm your parent that like super proud of you and like would love for you to be my daughter. So okay, so I move on to a semi heavier question. Since we're at a women's college, I think it's really important that I frame, this question in that context. So what does it mean to you, both of you, to be practicing art as Vietnamese American women in a mostly white male-centered discipline and profession?
That's a pretty heavy question. I think for me, I mean, I realize like a lot of times when this is maybe many years ago, every time I got interviewed about my art, everyone always asked me like, how does your artwork relate to you being Vietnamese American? And when did you immigrate here, immigrate here, and all these questions. And for me, I was, it's like, oh, okay, you assumed I immigrated here. Like they didn't even ask if I was born here.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and I guess it has always bothered me, like, why does my work have to be about my identity? Was another thing that bothered me. But like, it's something I do think about all the time. It's just not like something I talk about like through my artwork. But I feel like it has been a challenge as far as like, I always compare myself like, oh, if I was a straight white male, like where would I be in the art world or see other friends? I mean, like in any fields, basically. You realize or I feel like I just have to work harder or just keep on doing what I'm doing and hope to be recognized.
Yeah. Dao, do you want
to? Yeah. I guess I would just mention kind of what you're saying, Christine. Like I agree with that, and it's always something that I've actually admired about you and your work is that you've just done your own thing, and it doesn't have to fit into this political context. I think it's wonderful that there are Vietnamese American artists that are dealing with the politics, and I think everyone should obviously like you should do what's compelling to you. But I think there is also the potential of this trap where identity becomes only defined by trauma or only defined by certain circumstances, or where white viewers can look at a person of color and think that if they understand the refugee experience or something, they understand that person, but they might not. Like every individual has like their way of dealing with diaspora or their place in it. I think about, like, it's definitely a question I think about a lot. I've also, as Ánh-Hoa mentioned, like we are both part of She Who Has No Masters, which is a collective of Vietnamese women writers, and that I co-founded with Isabel Thuy-Palode of the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network. And so thinking about, like, I know a lot of Vietnamese women artists and writers who are doing so much work, who have been doing a lot of work for a lot of years, and who don't receive the amount of recognition that male writers or artists do. And they just don't, like, it's just like, it's, and that has a lot to do with our society, with like being a person of color, being Vietnamese, being a woman. And so like, those are challenges I think about a lot. At the same time, just like, rather than being bitter about it or thinking about it too much, I also think that the antidote is just making and like just continuing to build our own context for it. And like sometimes you can spend a lot of time knocking on doors. I feel like in the publishing world, especially, like I did spend a lot of time knocking on the doors that I thought I was supposed to. And at some point I kind of made this decision, well, what if I just went to just where my, what if I like let the offers come to me, or where it like went where the energy like felt right and welcoming. And like I published a hybrid poetry art book with an independent press based out of Hanoi, a jar press, which was run by two women. And that was like one of these things that I did where it was like this completely organic like decision. Like I was just gonna like the time it took, and like I was going to do it like just out of the spirit of that collaboration. And like that was like a really big step for me, like just reconnecting with, I guess, Vietnam and the hybrid poetry thing. So those are, there's, I guess, I don't know if that's answering the question, but I feel like, it is something I think about a lot, and then I do actively try to work. And like with She Who Has No Masters, like definitely trying to like create a space that is nurturing for other Vietnamese and Southeast Asian like women, which I think is just important, just that other young artists or writers can see the women.
It makes me think of kind of like the Taoist like energy and where your energy flows, and if it's like pushing up against something, if that's the best use of your energy versus like shifting and making a different path. You know what I mean? And so what I love about She Has No Masters is that it feels as if we're like, it's not that it's almost like we're not concerned, right, with the white male centered gaze or power structure, and that we're creating our own, we're creating art in our own terms, right? And so that's something that, especially with this show, that was really important to me, is that, there's just such an expectation of what an Asian woman is in the United States, especially, and even in our patriarchal societies that we come from. And, it's really important that we bring our genius to the forefront, because, unless people see us, what we're doing in a different way, or that we do these things, people are always going to think that we're going to be nail salon people, or we're just, like sexual objects, or, we're just moms, we're scholars, we're intellects, we're creators. There's so much that we bring to the table. And I feel like a lot of times I find that people get upset when I don't fulfill their expectations of what they think I'm supposed to be or do.
I think it's also important, like just the idea of like women artists making art for themselves or making art for each other. I mean, maybe like you can, it's just like I think maybe I should phrase it as in like not making art in response to the expectations only, like not just making reactionary art, because that sort of like reaffirms the power structures. So like, especially with She Who Has No Masters, it's like this, like, what do we just do? Like some of it's in response to outward pressures, but also like, what about our own interiority? And just, so those are some of the things I think about, or like try to remind myself of, like where I root.
Well, that's why I love Christine's work so much, because there's such a strength in your interiority. And it's such an amazing universe, that I love the fact that like it exists in its own dimension,
Yeah, but the past, I think, year or so, I was like, oh, maybe I should tap into my identity. And then it just seems so forced for me. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do my thing. It's okay, but be supportive of course, other artists and other creatives that are doing the other work. And I'll just be me.
So I'm going to shift it to a question we didn't talk about, but I really, I feel like I'd really like to spend a little time on the fact that there's a resonance for both of your work, that, we had talked about it as otherworldly. We talked about kind of like this relationship with water, or this idea of soundlessness, and the irony, or the, coincidence that both of you have Instagram IGs that are like very similar in the way that you talk about moon and water and stuff. So can you guys talk about a little bit about that, like your inspiration for like your relationship with water or in the cosmic kind of interpretations in your work?
Well, I can give you an astrological reason. I have a lot of, like both my moon and my Mercury are in Pisces. So I do have a lot of Neptunian, like water influence. But beyond that, I like water as an element. I also like rocks. And I like, I am very like interested in the energetic qualities of things, and especially that plays into sound. So I think that is like a level of communion or reception that I'm very interested in as an artist and as a person, just how things vibrate. So there's something in that, obviously, that like, you know, guides me even more so than like the outward politics.
Yeah. Christine, what do you, I mean, it's funny because sometimes I think of Dao's work as like subterranean, and I think of your work as like above atmosphere. So, but you do have a lot of sea elements in your work as well.
Yeah, for me, I mean, it's all like, I would say inspired by, because my dad was a commercial fisherman and I've always lived in California up until recently. Just have always been by the water. And for me, you know, my artwork or my practice has to do with a lot of the micro and macro worlds. So for me, it's like looking at something underwater or, you know, in a microscope, or even like looking at water under a microscope or other things. It's like very similar to looking into a telescope. Mm-hmm. Like those two worlds are very similar. So that's where my water and I guess outer space kind of thing merges. So that's my thing in a nutshell.
Okay. So for the last question for the night, so at what point of your journey would you say that you realized that you were going to be a professional artist and that it wasn't just a hobby or something that you dabbled in? And what advice or wisdom would you give to our students at St. Kate's as they begin their careers as artists?
I think for me, I think I always knew I wanted to be an artist. And what point did I think I was a professional artist? I don't know. It's been with me my whole entire life. So it's hard. I think at some point, you know, when I would meet people, I'd be like, "Hi, I'm Christine Nguyen. I'm trying to be an artist." And at some point, my friends were like, "You're not trying to be an artist anymore. You are an artist." But as far as advice, I feel really grateful and lucky. Like right after grad school, immediately I got a job at a museum. So I worked at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles as a photographer for like 14 years. So I think having a backup job that maybe is within like a museum is a good place to start, because you can, I don't know, you're surrounded by art and there's other different jobs you can do within the museum and then still have your practice. But if I was to do it all over again after having this job at the museum, I think I would have like done conservation. Would be probably my thing, because then you're actually working with other artworks. I mean, I was photographing artwork, but I feel like I'd rather have the hands-on, like restoring artwork. So I would have like gotten my art degree and maybe like something in conservation as a backup.
Backup. What about you, Dao?
I feel like it's like a really precarious profession, but I feel like Christine's example is a much better one than I could offer from my experience to younger artists. Like it's very pragmatic, and it's great to have that other skill that's still somewhat related to your art. I've had like a lot of other kinds of jobs, and then some years have been like shakier than others, certainly. and then, multiple jobs. So it's like sort of my strategy has been, like a few years ago, I started working in like the nonprofit arts world. So doing arts administration. So like I've gone from like teaching and then random other, trying to freelance, write, and this like art organizing has been a little closer to like, it feels like it feeds in and it kind of grows my understanding also of like the world, and just how these things work a little more. But I feel like keeping a low overhead is also maybe just one strategy that has helped me like free up time to make art, and then also like, work from home or be with my family. But I
I
think
feel like being an artist, being an artist, you're always just hustling. I feel like
Mhm.
creative, like doing, even though I had, let's say, my Getty job, I still was doing a gazillion bunch of other things.
Yeah.
Do you think it matters to you? It's kind of similar to like being a writer, like the first time you get published in a journal or something, but like, did it matter to you to get a grant or to get your first exhibition, or, what was that kind of turning point where you're like, oh my gosh, I think this is for real, or it's, like and then the momentum kind of gets going,
Well, that would be like another thing to say, like grants do help. I've like the largest amounts of money that I've made, from art have been from grants. And they do like I received the Creative Capital grant a few years ago, and that was like a big, kind of turning point, but it's actually something that I'm still in process on. But like that, it's validating, and then also it puts you in company with like a lot of other artists, which can be really inspiring. And then, everybody needs funding, like whether it's just to buy like more time to make your art, or to be able to like be more ambitious in what you're trying to do. So
yeah. What about you, Christine? What was your first big show like that you're like, oh my gosh?
Yeah, I think it would be that Hammer Museum show. It was like maybe a couple years after grad school, but then even after that show, it's still like, okay, what's the next show? Or then how do you find a gallery? I don't know. It's just really struggling. Still like today, I'm still like trying to figure out the gallery world. And I think what led me to quit my day job finally was I was more busy with public art. It's like
I love your public art. Yeah.
Another venture to get into as far as like trying to survive or make money. And I really like how public art, it's for anybody and everyone, and it's permanent. It doesn't have to be like gallery or museum goers. So it's like doing a bunch of things, like having exhibitions, doing public art, I don't know, random photography for people.
Would you say then, as you developed as an artist, that your audience changed? Like who would you say is your audience today?
I don't think because I still do gallery or exhibitions and then public arts, and actually I feel like the work I've made in institutions or galleries is what I show to try and get public art, surprisingly, because they're interested in the installations and stuff, and it's like, oh well, how are you going to translate that into a permanent piece? So like my public art is still very much looks like my practice. It's not like separated. So I think maybe that way my audience has grown, I guess I would say. It's like the same, but just more appeals to different people.
What about you, Dao?
It's hard to say. I don't know who my audience is, but like sometimes a lot I feel like the audience I hear from the most are like other poets and artists, and yeah, like has it changed? It's changed over the years. It has to do with like I think being in Portland, and then a lot of it is like just building community with She Who Has No Masters and with Divan. there is a large Vietnamese diaspora community that's engaged. I don't know how much attention they're actually paying to my art, but I think like, you know, to she who has no masters and sort of the, you know, our presence in the community or something like that, that is, you know, that makes an impression. But yeah, I continue to hope like, or to like just keep in mind or you know, sort of like the desire is like connectivity, like that is like on a genuine level, or just that sometimes I feel like my art's weird, or just, you know, too experimental or something. So like just, you know, kind of trying to stay open for like the deepest possible or the best, you know, conversations, rather than just being seen on the surface or tokenized or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons why I love your work, both your work together, is that both your work kind of does that. It like it invites you in, and it's yeah. I just really love when I see something and I get like a either emotional or physical, or I mean like when all the parts of my body are like stimulated, like, you know, my intellect, my heart, my soul, like it's like the work that you guys make is so holistic, you know, and I really appreciate that so much. And so I think I have to share you now with the audience. So if people have any questions, feel free to unmic, or you can put them in the chat. And then Nicole, do you have any questions if we don't have any right away?
I don't see any questions, but just want to say that Maria says, I'm here for the astrological explanations, which I thought was sweet. And just an FYI to everyone that I put a link to She Who Has No Masters into the chat, as well as examples of Christine's public art. And I really encourage you to spend some time with the websites of both of these artists, because they're really incredible. Just the expansiveness of the work that you both do is really incredible. Maybe a question that I have, or maybe something that the three of you would be willing to talk about together, is sort of like, what do you see as sort of the connection points between the work that you do? Because it presents very differently. But Ánh-Hoa, you made certain curatorial decisions about bringing these artists together. Christine and Dao, I know you've worked together in the past. I'm wondering what do you see as those connection points? Like, where do you think your work is overlapping?
Well, I feel like we've talked about this before, but I think we do have sort of an affinity for nature in common. Like you, Christine, you talk about the sea. I grew up in Northern California, in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, and it was a very small town. And my stepfather built our house, and I grew up with like dogs and ponies, and chickens, and like running around a lot in the grass. And so sometimes I feel like I communed more probably with like the trees and the animals, being also like, you know, shy and very introverted. So I don't know if that's like, I mean, just talking about nature, I guess.
Yeah, and then we have, I guess we both went to like Iceland and have this affinity with Iceland, I would say. I don't know, just like kindred spirits.
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt an affinity for your work, Christine, ever since I first saw it. So it's like, it's always just been like, that's, I mean, it's been more than 10 years now, right? I think we figured out, like, I probably saw it for the first time in like 2010, that we like, and then we collaborated on the chapbook.
And then you jammed together.
Jammed together.
Yeah, we did a show. It was actually a show that you were part of, Christine, I think first. That was a community in Southern California that was like Vietnamese women artists, and we did a collaboration. But mine was just like a piece of writing, and you drew illustrations to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I think we just played music that night, actually.
Yeah. There is a website of that Origin Tale.
Performance, really?
No, the Origin Tale project. And if I can locate it, I will. Actually, I'll put it in the chat, because we made a Tumblr page, and it's like I was writing, and this is part of like I was writing about the origin tale of Vietnam, and some of that writing like went into like a later hybrid project. But I wrote this sort of version of the myth where the mother fairy meets the father dragon, and
I forgot about this.
And Christine did illustrations to it, and so we do have this like Tumblr page of it that's sitting there, and there are a couple songs from each of us on it, which like some like having to do with
Yeah, I think the song I wrote was about that tale. I think we did write about the same.
Yeah, I think we're both writing about it. So just a bit of...
So we do have one question in the chat. Do you want me to read it, Nicole, or would you like to read it?
Go ahead. That would be great, Ánh-Hoa.
Okay, so this is from Katrin Magnuson. The question's for Dao. Can you speak to your use of parentheses and brackets as a visual language?
Yeah. I guess I start as a writer, but also just like as a writer, skeptical of language and skeptical of like the abstract or the signifying qualities of language, just as in, you know, it's really strange. We step back and think about it, that we have these marks on the page and then we attribute meaning to them. And then using the parentheses and the brackets, like it actually began, like when I was writing, We Were Meant to Be a Gentle People, I was like sort of hearing these different voices, or I like imagined that they were different voices from different, you know, I don't know, realms or levels or something. And it does kind of go into this myth of like, you know, so, and I would use the parentheses or the double parentheses or like those pointy brackets to signify like different types of voices or something like that. And I had sort of worked out this relationship. And then over time, I guess I just continued playing with that. And the brackets speak to fragmentation. I guess I would point also to like things like the Fragments of Sappho, which is translated by Anne Carson, and the use of the brackets, you know, is used to like signify like lost pieces of writing or lost pieces of like actual material.
Oh yeah, like the missing text of Sappho. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the brackets like are they not just silence, but they speak to something like that can't be spoken or something maybe that's lost. And that was maybe a lot of what I was playing with in the recent instrument with the brackets. And I guess if you've seen the videos in the gallery, there's also the brackets are used. So it does have to do with fragmentation and just maybe that point where the written language just kind of isn't embodied by words.
Do you think of it? So two things come to my mind. One is Emily Dickinson's dashes, right, hyphens, but also like when I'm watching the video in the gallery, like they kind of remind me of breaths in the way that they appear and disappear. And so I don't know if that was intentional or not, but that's one of the ways that I interpreted the.
It's all a part of it. I think I would leave it open to, and you know, I welcome people's interpretations. The first time I created those bracket videos, I did like perform them with music. And there is like a song on the Traveler's Ode album, the I Stayed song, which is literally like the vocal textures you hear are like lines that are cut up and then they're randomized inside my computer software music program to create these vocal textures. So the animated brackets became sort of an animation of that vocal technique also.
That's cool. It's like behind the scenes, like understanding. So, okay, great. There's a question for Christine from John and Ellery Hicks Morarity. Do you feel like your process or materials have changed since moving away from California? Where do you go collecting for objects now?
Oh, that's such a good question.
That is a great question. Good job, John.
Being born and raised in California, I have access to all this greenery year round, and now that I live in Colorado, so it's very seasonal for me. I mean, right now I think it's just like branches and dried grasses. So what I usually do is I'll try and collect a lot of things in the spring and summer and press a lot of plants. That was the idea, and then use them in artwork in the winter. But now I feel like, I don't know, I haven't touched any of the things I collected, and more interested in like photographing, I don't know, like frozen lakes or the snow on stuff or crystals forming on my car.
Well, I took a picture of crystals before we got my car, and I was
Yeah.
you guys the other day.
Yeah. So now I think my collection is just different because it's not, there's no ocean or anything. So it's different kind of, I do notice there's like different plants or maybe trees or different leaves I don't see in California, I guess. And yeah, I mean, I guess I've lived here for maybe, I think I'm 3 years. So I should compare my collections of what I've been collecting lately. But yeah, definitely different.
Oh, wow. This is a long question.
More.
So this is from our illustrious Carol Chase. Oh, wow. For all of us, Dao and Christina Ánh-Hoa, I so appreciate your candid reflections of how you became artists and the ambiguity of life decisions, and how family and parents were at odds at times with your moves into the unknown territory of being an artist. How important was grad school for your development? Is there an alternative that you can imagine now that would necessarily involve grad school, that wouldn't necessarily involve grad school?
Good question.
It is a really good question. I'm going to be honest, because I don't have an MFA in visual art. I have an MFA in poetry, but I did study book arts and printmaking. And I always had art in my life, photography, an encyclopedia of painters in my head. So I mean, I kind of sometimes wish I had grad school so I had time and maybe more kind of instruction in different techniques or things like that. So but I would say as a writer, even though it wasn't the right grad school for me, I did really appreciate the community and craft classes and, having people to give me feedback. And just, I think the time, I think that's the most valuable thing for me. I don't know if the two of you, but like, it just was having time to not have to be like constantly working a 9 to 5 or something that I actually, I mean, I'm still paying for that time now, but I had the time, which was invaluable.
I would say grad school was like I went young, and I would not have gone if I didn't have a fellowship. So I would also say that like that's a really important thing. I guess access. Not everybody gets access, and I was fortunate to be offered a fellowship to go to the University of Iowa. I didn't even know what the University of Iowa was, like really, like as much as like other people who like kind of knew what the graduate program, its reputation. It was time definitely, and maybe like this sort of entitlement to consider, myself an artist or a writer. Like I learned that in graduate school. I would also say there was a lot of unlearning, and there was a lot of maybe less productive learning that happened, or that had to happen, afterwards, like the unlearning, just, because it's different now, but I think at the time I was very one of few Asian people and learning a very, Western style of storytelling. And so it took a while, like to find other contexts, or to realize like my context might be different or something, or my points of reference, needed to be different. I would like to think there's an alternative, and I would like to encourage that, I guess, for for students or younger artists, like the hope that there is an alternative. But it does make it easier, I guess. Like sometimes if you're working alone, like being in a school environment can give you a community and peers, and but if you're able to find that in the place you live, like that's also really valuable. Or I would also look for other types of education, like if there's like, you know, community education or something, or
What about you, Christine?
I think it was really, I'm glad I really went to grad school, even though I didn't like it. I did like the community and then having the time to make work. And I really feel like I developed my process there, like really spent the time to just focus on my work. But I had such a hard time in grad school as far as professors are trying to push certain ideas onto you. And so in the end, I think it made me a stronger person, and it made me actually deal with criticism better, because I realized like, oh, okay, not everyone's gonna like my work. You know, I think that's when I discovered in grad school, and I was like, oh, I'm okay with that. Like, it's okay that not everyone's gonna be into what I'm making, and it's okay to like stick with your guns and, you know, really do what you want to do and not to make work for other people, which I saw a lot of, I think, colleagues fell into. But as far as like paying for grad school, I realized, well, in California, I know the UC system, like if you get into grad school, I think if you TA, they pay for your tuition and you get paid. So that's something to think about as far as like financially. Because I think at the time I also got into like 2 private schools, and then I was doing the math and I'm like, I can't owe all this money. So like a UC school was really helpful in that regards. But yeah, I think grad school is pretty important. And looking back, just seeing how my work changed from undergrad to grad school and kind of set me up for, I guess, afterwards.
I would just kind of echo a little bit about grad school, because so I ended up going to Mills, and where I went to undergrad, and it wasn't necessarily my first choice. And you know, I think it's really important if you are thinking about grad school to kind of make sure that it's the right grad school for you, for the investment of time and money that you're going to make. The poets that were there were very much experimental, or like even the professors were kind of leaning more towards experimental, and during that time there wasn't a lot of room for kind of the hybrid type of narrative experimental, or you know, like different ways of thinking about expression, and then also being probably one of the few people of color in the program. It was like your stories make me uncomfortable, or maybe they didn't believe it in the same way, or it wasn't like following kind of prescribed, like you were saying, Dao, like understandings of reality or narrative, or people weren't willing to be open enough to kind of you know, see language, or you know, just I don't know, it was interesting because, you know, there's a question there about influences, and you know, Dao and I both really have Teresa Huck Cha as one of our influences, and so I was really drawn to her when I was in grad school because of her multilingual and her text and poetry, but that wasn't really happening at Mills at the time, and so I think you know, I would have really loved to have gone to a more interdisciplinary MFA program where I could have developed that skill. Is there anything else that you would like to share with students about this perseverance or a sense of self? I mean, I do think that the MFA allowed me to develop my voice as a poet. Like you, Christine, it's like there's so often you can get into a situation where you either mimic or you take on a style of your mentor or people you study with. And I think it really helped me to push back and be like, I'm not going to sound like you. I need to know who I am and what my voice is. Is that something that happened to you, Dao, in your?
Like there's like, I mean, there's so much. Like, I feel like I found my influences after graduate school, and kind of the people that I went to graduate school with. I actually I'm not friends with them anymore in the same way that I was, immediately after. Even though, like, at the time I thought, like, these were the people whose, career, like, were going to be parallel to mine, or that I was going to, and I want to say, like, I mean, a lot of it, I'm trying to think, like, there weren't a lot of other writers of color, like, in the environment. And I didn't meet other Vietnamese writers until after I published my first book. So it was only like after I had done a lot of work that I began to make contact with other, like, Vietnamese American or Vietnamese diasporic writers. And now, it's like, yeah, things are like the field of the artists I interact with now, I feel a lot more akin to. I would just say, like, for life advice, I would also just say, like, young people should live, or, like, people should, like, just, it's good to also live a life, like, live, like, your own personal life. Like, you can do all the studying in the world, but I think you still have to develop as a person too. And
Great.
and whether that's, like, with family or relationships with friends, or or relationships with lovers, like, it's just like there's so much that happens, like, as a person. Like, I would invite that into into the life of the artist as well.
Yeah. Okay, so Christine, you get the last word for the evening. What kind of
What do I have to say for my last words?
let's end on a hopeful note. What would you say to young artists today?
Just keep on doing what you're doing, and make sure you're, like, passionate about it. Be true to yourself, I think.
Yeah.
Be kind to yourself too, and make sure you take care of yourself as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole, do you have any last words for us for the evening?
Just to say thank all of you for this wonderful, just felt like this intimate conversation with all three of you, and it's been so enjoyable to get to know you in this way. And thank you for your time. I know that we're kind of all in different time zones, so we really appreciate you coming together and talking with us tonight. It was really inspiring. So I don't think I have anything else to add, Ánh-Hoa, unless you want to say anything else?
Well, it's a little cheesy, but I think that it's really important to have love in your life as an artist. I mean, there's pain and suffering in life and struggles that build character. But I think in order to be able to have an open heart or a full heart, or to persevere, I think part of the equation of perseverance is if not your family, friends, community, people who, that where when you're tired, someone else picks you up, and when they're tired, you pick them up. And I just think it's really important that that art does not be created in a vacuum, that it's very much about, it doesn't necessarily have to be about activism, but we are processing our time, the time that we're on Earth. And I think that as much nourishment you can have, and whatever that means to you, I think is really important, because being an artist is really hard. But there's just so much reward when there is that connection, like Dao was saying, and that you do touch another person, or you resonate. So that with the reverberating bodies, it's like when the work resonates with you, or vibrates through you, or transforms you in some way. And just as an ending note for the person who asked about parentheses, the reason why we have parentheses in the gallery is because Christine and I love Star Trek. And so these parentheses are kind of like the portals into the world. So you get beamed into a different world. And so I really hope that everyone is able to come and see the show and to engage with it in person. And thank you so much for being here. I'm at St. Kate's, so if you ever want to visit in the floor CDC building, would love to meet you. Thank you.
That's a lovely way to end. Thank you. Thanks, Ánh-Hoa. Thank you, Dao and Christine. Have a wonderful
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Night.
Bye.
Bye.